epistemology, you may recall, is the study of knowledge. I believe I may have said when I introduced this initially that knowledge is a very important term to philosophy. It has to do with, let's say, information that philosophers feel is dependable. We can count on something which we call knowledge. Whereas there are other things we may think are true, but we can't be that sure. We can't really be that confident of what it is. So we might say, I think it's true, I believe it's true, I guess it's true, I hope it's true, whatever it could be. But if you say, I know it's true, you're stating a certain confidence in the ability of that to stand up to scrutiny, to be dependable when you act and things like that. So, not act in the sense of theater, but we act on the things we believe are true, and we probably have a wide range of certainty concerning whether something is true or not. And those which we are willing to say, it's true and I can depend upon it, are things we might call knowledge. So it's very important. Most philosophers think that's really a key to understanding the whole human process, is to first understand what we know and then how we act upon what we know. So it is an important, very important part of philosophy. But to get deeper into it, one way to do it is to come up with our often are called the main questions of epistemology. And so that's where we'll go next. And I've reduced the questions to 3 in number and try to give them somewhat simple names so you'll be able to remember them. So let's look at some of the questions of epistemology. The first question I will call the what question. This is sort of my own terminology. The what question asks, what is it that we can know? What is something that can be known? And already there is a problem that comes up because epistemology really can't answer that question unless it knows something more. And honestly, what it needs to know more is the nature of reality. Because if we're going to ask, what can you know? You have to also sort of ask, what is there that's real that we can know? Because you can't have knowledge of something that doesn't exist or is not real or is, except as it is a falsehood or as it is a fiction. You might ask, what is the character of Santa Claus? Now, we know something about, let's say, the lore and tales of Santa Claus, the fiction, the stories that are told about him. Well, that's about a particular character. To say, what is a character in a different meaning? A particular character. If we were to ask something about the character in, let's say, in a moral sense of the term, the character of Santa Claus, that's something we can't answer. We can't have any knowledge of that because there is no being known as Santa Claus about whom we can have this kind of factual information. So the answer to the what question depends upon a question of, well, what's real? And that's not a question that epistemology addresses. That's a question that metaphysics addresses. Metaphysics, all was a study of reality. And like epistemology, I think I sort of deferred until later, deferred until this time, to talk about metaphysics as well. So actually what we'll talk about today, or what I'll talk about today as a preliminary to Descartes, are the questions of epistemology and also the concepts of reality in metaphysics and how they sort of have to work together. They do have to work together because if you're going to ask what is real, I mean, if you're going to ask what you can know, you have to sort of first answer what's real. And you can't possibly come up with an answer of what it's possible to know until we can distinguish between what's real and what's false, what's fictional, what's delusional, what everything else happens to be. So already we have to sort of, to answer one of the questions, one of the first questions, we have to get into the area of metaphysics. So that's at least a starting point. The what question is a question, what is it that we can know, which sort of depends upon what's actually out there, so to speak, or in there, because there's an inner reality too. The important thing is what can we know. The second question is the how question. The how question asks, what capabilities do we as creatures have for knowledge, to be able to determine what's true and what isn't, whether something is knowable or not knowable. The how question asks about our capabilities. So you might say it's almost an internal question, whereas the what question was more an external question. The what question was about the nature of the world of reality, which not, in most cases, probably entirely internal. There's probably one, maybe things, an external world. The how question asks what capacities do we have to be able to, let's say, interrogate whatever world it is, whether it's an internal or an external world, and come up with knowledge. I mean, because that's the whole purpose of it, is to come up with knowledge, come up with something dependable. Not just guesswork or theory, but how can we use whatever capabilities we have as a way of being able to understand the nature of the knowledge of whatever happens to be real. Now, if we go to metaphysics again and say, well, this might depend entirely upon what is the nature of reality. This is what's going to, we'll find, you're probably already finding a rather abstract portion of the class of the lesson, but that's okay. Sometimes you got to do that, and that's what we're doing now. The nature of reality. By that I mean, here's a question. Is all reality physical? Is physical reality all there is? If the answer to that is yes, most people probably don't answer it that way though. If the answer to that question is yes, then the how question is pretty easy to work on, because nature or evolution or some mechanism has fitted us with senses that are able to, let's say, be fairly close to interrogating and finding out information about the external world, the physical world, that world outside our minds. That physical world is able to, our senses seem to be able to interrogate that, and that seems to make the nature of physical reality pretty easy for us. No?
You mentioned senses, so we have more than just our sight for our senses.
Yeah. Think of the five senses: sight, smell, taste, hearing. My hearing smells good, and touch, those kinds of things. Yeah. By senses we mean what often is called the sensorium, this collection of the five senses and how they work to be able to determine the physical nature of reality, or the physical nature of physical reality. Now, the question is here, if reality is only physical, then the game is over. We got all we need. Oh, probably all we need. The how question. As I said, however, a lot of people think, oh, there's not just a physical world, there's a non-physical world. And they may think in terms of, well, I have thoughts and ideas, those aren't physical. I have hopes, I have dreams, I have memories. You may have memories of physical events, but the memories themselves are stored as some sort of ideas that at least they come back to you as non-physical events in the mind rather than as whatever the physical events they tend to depict. And even if you're trying to find, well, we can relate that all to the brain. You know, brain states, the brain is a physical organ. Ideas, thoughts, memories, etc., anticipations, fears, they are all essentially neurons firing in a certain kind of a sequence, and therefore even these non-physical things can be traced back to a physical organ, and physical activities of a physical organ, therefore the world is physical, end of story. However, there are many people who believe that there is a God, or many people who believe there is something other than the kind of things that we can trace back to the brain. Many people believe that God is not a brain state that we happen to have sort of bedeviling us, but there is a God, a transcendent, non-human being that exists outside of our reality, but still able to affect our reality. In that case, you have something like a non-physical element of reality that can just be traced back to our brain states. If that's true, then we have to sort of add to the metaphysical little gumbo there. The metaphysical gumbo, we have to add something non-physical. We can sort of leave it as to whether thoughts and ideas are non-physical, minds are non-physical, or whether only God is non-physical, souls, etc., whether they are non-physical. We'll leave that aside if we're going to at least open the door to say there's a good chance that there is something non-physical in reality. Then we come up with another problem for the how question. The how question was pretty easy to answer when there was only a physical world. But when there is at least a portion of the world of reality that's non-physical, then we have to ask the how question once again. And it becomes much more difficult to answer. One way to answer, of course, is, well, thoughts, ideas, beliefs, memories. Those are things that, I have direct access to. My thoughts, my ideas, my memories, my beliefs, etc. They're in there, I can dredge them up, I can't dredge as much of them as I used to be able to, but you can dredge up these kinds of things, and you can say, well, I have direct access to it. So the how question is, I mean, it's over, there it is, I got the how question. There is a non-physical reality, it is called my thoughts and ideas, etc. I can interrogate them, bring them up, inspect them, and I have that capability. It's sort of an internal capability that I don't really need too much help with. And that works up to a point. It works up to the point of you being able to say, well, maybe you're able to say, I'm the only conscious being in the universe, and so that's okay, because nobody else is conscious. Nobody else has thoughts, nobody else has ideas, beliefs, feelings, etc. Therefore, the only non-physical world I need to have any knowledge of is the only non-physical world that exists, me, my own mental state. Now, most people don't believe that. Most people believe that other people are conscious just the way I am, but that's going to be a problematical assumption to make. Let me tell you a story. This is, again, a true story about my past. I was a rebellious kid. You can't believe that, I'm sure. And gave my parents a lot of trouble. And then I turned 6 months. Yeah, and then I got better. No, I was about 9 or 10. A real crisis. It wasn't just that I was a smart ass. I mean, that was bad enough. But I thought everything was wrong in this world. Something went, I just didn't quite understand why things happened the way they were. And I was rebellious, I was angry, I was snotty, I was the worst son of a man you'd ever want to be related to, and nobody wanted to be related to me. And what changed that almost immediately was, I can't remember how the idea came to me, but the idea came to me that I realized that my family, especially my parents, my family were all robots. And once I understood that they were robots, everything made sense. That, my mother, clamp your own, don't put that in your mouth, don't take it. I mean, it's just something this back in the day before there was solid state stuff, digital stuff. There's all the cable loop going on. And they programmed, and my father was the same sort of thing. He had his religious tape loop going on, same thing over and over again. And my 2 brothers were younger than me, a pain to the ass, they were. And so, and they had their own little loop going, and I suddenly realized that explains everything. That I'm the only conscious being in the universe, and soon Casey will be unconscious, so that'll save any problem. I'm the only conscious being in the universe, and these people I can explain as robots, and I went to a family reunion, just more robots, loud robots. Loud robots are pretty cool robots, but still, frankly, they're just bleeper robots. So that helped me a whole lot, but of course it didn't solve the problem. But I had a year of, my personality changes dramatically from being angry and surly to sort of always having a little chuckle, always sort of a little smile. When they would get on my case, and whenever these different things would happen, I would just sort of look inwardly and say, there it goes. So that was great. It was almost a year. I almost had that for a year until finally I guess I outgrew it, and things started going downhill from that point. I think the high point in my life was at 10 years old, and it's just going steadily downhill ever since. And but it was a great ride. But this points out the problem that if we're going to say there is a non-physical reality, we do have access to our own direct access. We don't have access to anybody else's. So are we going to say that other people aren't conscious the way I am? Or how are we going to explain it? Because knowledge is an important thing. And we're going to say, do I have knowledge of what you're thinking? Most of you thinking, God, this is so boring. Oh my God, isn't it 6:15 yet? I mean, this is, I'm lucky I can't look into your minds and see exactly what you're thinking. Because civility grades would plummet as a result. Even if you're just subconsciously incivil, I can still take the points off, I suppose. Okay. And if you were to look into my mind and know exactly what I was thinking, well, we'd all be embarrassed and the dean would be getting the letters. And so it's just as well that our ability to see one another's thoughts, it probably keeps a lot of murders from occurring and things like that. But epistemologists don't worry about that. not too many epistemologists actually do get murdered. And that's a good thing. It attracts a good group of people to philosophy, because they know of all the groups that's likely to be murdered, philosophy is really near the bottom of the list. And so as a result, the fact that we can't see each other's thoughts is, for epistemologists, more of a serious thing than for everybody else. And so the how question is a problem. It's a problem not in the physical world, but it is a problem if there is a non-physical world. So we'll leave the how question for now, but we're going to get back to it, because this is going to be an ongoing problem depending on our view of reality. We're going to get much more complicated with our view of reality in a minute, but for right now, I want to go through the questions here. And the third one, there's only three that I'm using, is what I call the criterion question. The criterion question asks, if knowledge is such an important thing, what's the standard for saying something is knowledge as opposed to something is hearsay, guesswork, hope, belief, hunch, whatever else it might be? So there needs to be a line drawn. There has to be something to say, this is the characteristic that if it has these characteristics, we'll make it knowledge. Anything less than that will make it something other than knowledge. Knowledge being a sign of dependability, something that we can bank on, so to speak. So the criterion question is an important question. For Descartes, it was, he doesn't quite say it this way, but he addresses the criterion question first. It sort of comes up almost naturally. It evolves out of the first meditation. But still, he answers the criterion question because he realizes if he's going to get anywhere, that's a question it's almost got to come first. He thought it was really just about the first question you got to ask in epistemology is, okay, how can we draw the line between that which is knowledge and dependable, that which is not knowledge, which may be still probable or likely or even very attractive, but still not at that, whatever that level is. Is it a high level? There are some philosophers who have thought probability is enough, that we don't have to have anything like a high threshold of knowledge or a high threshold criterion for it to be called knowledge. Some people believe it's more like a sense of high probability is sufficient, not something like mathematical certainty. And so the answer to the criterion question will also then tell us which way you're going to be going as far as what you'll accept as knowledge and what you won't accept as knowledge. And so when we get to the meditations, when we get to the first meditation, we'll see what Descartes uses as his criterion and how he justifies it. So we'll leave that for the first meditation, or I'd rather have Descartes make his points in his way rather than me make his points for him. But there's some things he doesn't say explicitly in the meditations that I'll be putting up here, particularly when we get to metaphysics, because while the meditations are really about the search for knowledge, he recognizes you can't get very far without dealing with metaphysical questions. And so he has come around to the same point of view that most philosophers have, is that these subjects almost have to be dealt with together. They are separate in the sense that they do deal with a separate part of thinking and of sort of a concept of the way the world is. But at the same time, they work together, but they have to be conceived of as separate kinds of subjects. So here are the three questions, and there can be other questions. I've just sort of narrowed it down to these three questions, which are often asked within the area of epistemology. The what question, what can we know? The how question, how do we know it? And the criterion, what you're going to call the threshold level of knowledge. Yeah, you.
Clarify criterion, so what do you mean the threshold level of knowledge?
A criterion merely means what standard are you going to set for something being knowledge as opposed to something less than knowledge. Maybe you might say guesswork or probability or likelihood or belief or something like that might be at a little lower level of dependability than what we would call knowledge. And I'm glad you brought it up because it gave me a chance to think out loud while I was answering your question. And that is, another point has to do with the nature of knowledge is thought to be, at least in philosophical terms, the nature of knowledge is thought to be, in some sense, necessarily public. By public, I mean that anything you're going to say is knowledge. I know X, whatever X happens to be, should be something that in principle other conscious, sentient, rational beings could arrive at the same conclusion. This sort of eliminates the possibility of real knowledge being strictly private knowledge, things that only are things that you have access to. Now, this is gonna make for a real problem when we get to the problem of, well, of other minds. We'll get to that when we get to that. It's a problem that needs to be addressed. But right now, I just wanna talk about, let's say, it's not just the public nature of knowledge. It's not that all knowledge has to be public, but in principle, it has to be something that's open for objective confirmation. That if I say this is true, it ought to be something that another rational person could look at, similarly situated and with the same, context, and be able to either confirm or disconfirm that that's true. If what I'm trying to make a claim of happens to be strictly something that is internal, or something that only for some reason I have access to, and it's going to be difficult to call it knowledge. There are going to be a lot of roadblocks in the way of calling that knowledge, and knowledge is such an important term philosophically, that if you have too many roadblocks and you can't get past them, then you sort of have to give up on certain maybe pet things that you think you want to call knowledge, but because they are not confirmable by anybody, that you have to sort of put them in a special category of something or another. Talk about that in a little bit, maybe next time. So there we have the three questions, and as I said, sort of the public or the need for confirmation in knowledge. What kinds of knowledge is there? All these are types of knowledge. There are, well, the types of knowledge sometimes are pretty controversial. Let's start off with the easiest one first, proposition. Most knowledge is actually propositional. Propositional, think of a proposition. A proposition is a claim. A claim is a declarative sentence. So the propositional knowledge is merely knowledge that can be stated, let's say, as the conclusion of a sound argument, where the premises are true, the structure is valid, and the conclusion is true. That conclusion would be propositional knowledge. You would know it, not just know it as this claim, but you would know why it's true. And that's an important thing. In order to be able to say something is true, you can't just state it blankly and then walk away. Epistemologically speaking, you are committed in some sense to being able to explain why it's true. What's the reasoning process that leads you to make this claim? Propositional knowledge is the easiest knowledge to be able to substantiate. You just point to an argument or a construction argument. That's what it's going to be, and there you have it. So propositional knowledge, pretty straightforwardly simple. There are really sort of two kinds of propositional knowledge we'll look at. You can call them sort of either internal or external. I'm going to call them this. Okay. Knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description. Other philosophy textbooks may do it this way in a different way. It's just the way I want to do it. It seems like a good way to do it. Knowledge by acquaintance is knowledge you have first-hand knowledge of. In other words, you observe it, you construct the argument, you come to the conclusion. It all comes from, it isn't internal knowledge necessarily, but it's knowledge that you can arrive at, or you have a ribbon at. Is that what it would be? I don't, anybody know what the past butchered form of arrive happens to be?
Arrived.
Huh?
Arrived.
Arrived? Oh, I like a ribbon much better, isn't it? Maybe isn't it some sort of an antiquated version of arrive? It'd be a ribbon? Okay. Okay, arrived. Let me just change the sentence. I want it. So if you are the person who has been able to formulate the argument and came up with a proposition that X is true, that is sort of knowledge by acquaintance. So you might say first-hand knowledge. Knowledge by description is knowledge that you obtain from someone else's, description. And of course, what this requires then, with knowledge by acquaintance, as long as you're pretty sure of your own ability to observe, your own ability to create an argument, your own ability to troubleshoot that argument, then you can be pretty sure of the conclusion being true. Knowledge by description is a much more difficult thing, because then you have to be able to either confirm for yourself that something is true, which then turns it into knowledge by acquaintance, or you have to trust the source. You have to be able to know that the source is a reliable source and that their argument is good, their observations are well-based and all that kind of stuff. So propositional knowledge is thought to be the sort of the bedrock of all philosophical knowledge, and we can sort of divide it into those two ungainly parts. Many philosophers think this is the end of knowledge. I mean, this is all there is, there's no more. There's only one category of knowledge, propositional knowledge. These are the sort of logic themes that pop up in philosophy a whole lot. I went to school with a few of them, and some other people too, think that if you can't put it in an argument, it doesn't exist. Wittgenstein was that way in a way. Or early Wittgenstein was that way. Early Wittgenstein, the young man who was in his 20s, wrote this great book called the Tractatus Philosophicus, Logio Philosophicus. And in the Tractatus, his opening sentences are saying that the world, the universe, all that exists are just claims. You know, the way he said it was, the world, all that is the case are facts, not things. Things are not logically significant. Things, objects, people, activities. Only thing that's important are facts. Because facts you can plug into an argument and come up with a true conclusion if the argument's sound. So that there are a lot of people, and Wittgenstein changed it too later in life. Almost did a 180. But young Wittgenstein was a real sort of a logic monger. And so many people think this is all there is to knowledge. But other people think, wait, you're missing something. There's something that can't be reduced to, and it's not the only thing, but one glaring thing. There's a certain kind of knowledge that a person could have that can't be reduced to a set of propositions, but certainly is knowledge. People who are propositional knowledge folks say, no, we rule that out in principle. But there is. And here it's called knowing, I'm calling it knowing how. And just from the description, you sort of have an idea what that means. We probably all learned to ride a bike when you were kids. I cooked a real nice meal on Sunday for some people I hadn't seen for 30 years. A retired research meteorologist and a mother, and had a good time. Talked about stuff, drank wine, and I cooked a pretty damn good meal. And I made some dumplings, made some really nice dumplings I hadn't made before. Sort of on the model of crab rangoon. You know what crab, the cream cheese filled thing. But I've always hated crab rangoon because it was just rangoon. There's never any damn crab in it. At least maybe the cheap restaurants I go to. Oh, I don't run a cheap restaurant. I run a hell of a fine restaurant. And I had shrimp rangoon, real big chunks of shrimp, and yellow bell peppers and cilantro and stuff like that. Soy sauce, a little bit of, wonderful. So I could argue that I know how to make shrimp rangoon, something that nobody I guess has ever made before. Or I know how to play a Chopin mazurka on the piano. Or I know how to ride a bike. Or something else. You can name any number of things. And I think of the Chopin mazurka. I think it's probably a better example than the crab rangoon. I was a music major when I first went to college. I probably mentioned this before until I found out that, they kicked me out. I flunked out. And I flunked out because I found, of all insults, I was actually expected to practice as a music major instead of just be awarded a degree by acclamation by the faculty. And I thought it was terrible. So anyway, but I still know how to play a few things on the piano. So there's a few groups of that. The Opus 59, I think Opus 1, 2, and, numbers 1, 2, and 3, Opus 59 of Chopin. Really nice mazurkas. So let's say I claim I can do it. But every time I play it, it'll be different. I can play it slowly, and still be within the mood of the piece. I can play it more quickly, still be in the mood of the piece. I may play it loudly, then change dynamics rapidly. I may play it at a rather sedate dynamic level. There can be a whole lot of ways in which I can do it, so that literally it becomes, except for the notes, something of a different mazurka every time I play it. So if we're going to say that all knowledge is this stable and inflexible set of propositions, then my playing a particular Chopin mazurka is very, I hate to say unstable, and that may in fact be true, but at least it doesn't always sound the same every time. And so you would have to say, at least I know how to play it. I don't miss that many notes, and it may not sound like, Long Line playing it, but he plays everything too fast anyway, so I play better. But, you would have to say I know how. But the question becomes, if it's not a set of propositions, how do you, if I make this claim, I know how to play Chopin, Mazurka, Opus 59, number 3. How would there be any way of demonstrating it? Or just gonna let me boast? No, you're an epistemologist, damn it.
Bring in a piano.
Maybe sit at the piano and humiliate myself, and you're absolutely right. Of course, I think probably what you're gonna say too, Jack, that if knowledge has to be something that an objective observer can agree to, then I have to just play the piano, or ride the bicycle, or cook the souffle, or whatever it happens to be. And then you can find out whether or not I have that knowledge. But the knowledge itself can't be reduced to a set of propositions, because the knowledge is somewhat fluid and sometimes even somewhat flexible. And so you can't just say, this is the only possible way to play this mazurka. This is the only way a crowd riding moon should look. This is, that kind of thing. So knowing how is thought to be another form of knowledge by many people, not all philosophers accept knowing how as a kind of language, as a kind of knowledge, but most I think do. I think probably the majority do. So that's another kind of knowledge that sort of is, at least you have the ability to say, this can prove the claim I'm making, that I know how to do this, is true because I can demonstrate the claim. So that's pretty straightforward. The last of the 3 types of knowledge is very controversial. But I'm going to name it because it's a rather interesting topic. Call it brute facts. But what I'm going to actually call it is brute fact with the S in parentheses, because even people who claim that this is a category of knowledge, some who claim that only think there have been ever one brute fact. So it could be more than one. I don't know. I'm not going to argue one or the other. I do want to explain what a brute fact is. It's pretty easy to explain what it is, first of all. That's the only easy part. The second part, more difficult part, is trying to find one. I mean, even with a good description, this means it's easy to find one. So let's see what it is. A brute fact is, first of all, it's a fact. You can't deny the truth of. I mean, it's so self-evidently true that there's no possibility that no rational person would ever deny its truth. So that's pretty simple. It's nothing mysterious. I mean, it's shit between the eyes. But the second part of a brute fact is, you can't explain how it came to be true. Now, you can explain knowing how it comes to be true by listening to a person play. You can know how a propositional truth is by looking at the argument and reconstructing the argument and evaluating the premises and the validity. All that stuff can tell you, this is why this claim is true. This is why the claim that he knows how to play the mazurka is true. Here we have something which you can't deny the truth of without it being preposterous, and yet you can't explain how it's true, why it's true. You can't explain, let's say, you can't give an explanatory mechanism for it. It is.
It should be very good. I don't know the existence of the universe or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it, that's, and what makes the existence of the universe controversial, well, first of all, the existence of the universe is not controversial. Let's say, for instance, if you want to say, oh no, the universe doesn't exist. I wish to be something of a skeptic like that. The problem with making the claim the universe doesn't exist is, of course, you, as a member of the universe, making that claim, already approve the universe exists because you get this. And actually, Descartes will make that same point in the second meditation. He'll make it more gracefully, but sort of giving you a little preview of what will be happening there. So, certainly the universe exists. And anyone who makes the claim the universe does not exist is already making a contradictory claim. The question is, how did the universe come to be? Now, that's not really a problem for many people. Today, it's still not a problem for many people. But there was a time in the 20th century, in the history of philosophy, and more in the history of, let's say, planetary science, cosmology, where that was a question. There was a time in the, certainly religious answers to the question are among the most prominent. When we get to meditation 3, and if we don't, I might leapfrog up to it. There's an argument in meditation 3 which is often called the cosmological argument for the existence of God. It's an attempt to show why God exists based upon how things all began. And for most people, certainly most people of faith, and people who don't have religious faith often can look at that argument and say, this explains where the physical universe came from. It was created. It was created by God either through the biblical mechanism or by some creator through whatever, whatever tradition you happen to believe in. It may not be a religious tradition, it may be some other ethnicity's tradition, whatever it is. Usually explanation is not hard to come by. But in the in the 1930s, 1940s, there was a theory of the universe that was popular for a while called the steady state theory, the steady state universe. And this is before the discovery of the Big Bang. The steady state universe theory was an interesting one, saying that the universe has always existed, and but going through perturbations, what we think of as creation and destruction. The universe has all just been sort of phases, and the universe has existed forever. The universe is what reality is, that you can't conceive of reality without thinking of the universe. The universe is it. Therefore, we just accept the universe as a part of the way things are. That just is what things are. Obviously, religious people disagree with this because they believe they have a good explanation already, God's creation of the universe. There was a philosopher, British philosopher, Bertrand Russell, who more or less, he wasn't the only person, but I'm sort of attributing this to Russell. Bertrand Russell more or less sort of came up with this whole idea of the existence of the universe being a brute fact. That if the universe was a steady state, in other words, the universe has always existed, that we could just say, first of all, we can't deny the existence of the universe. But if it's always been around, we can't explain how it came to be. We can't, if the universe is eternal, then we can't explain where the universe came, how it came to be. There is no mechanism. There is no creation story or creation anything to tell us how it came to be. So therefore, maybe we'll make that a brute fact. We can't deny the universe exists, we can't understand, or we can't explain how it came to be. And that had a certain amount of popularity, certainly not with religious folk, but with people who were looking for something other than a religious explanation. They said, oh, okay, this will solve the problem. We'll just say it's always been there, it's a brute fact. We can't question it, we can't explain it, there it is. Well, that worked pretty well until a couple of Jersey boys got in the way. Because I'm from New Jersey, I got to give the props to the Jersey boys. These Jersey boys were known as Wilson and Penzias, and they were scientists at Bell Labs in Holmdel, New Jersey, and they end up getting the Nobel Prize for their discovery of the background radiation that they were initially trying to study long-range communication from Bell Labs, AT&T, what it eventually became. And they were having a whole lot of problem with long distance and certainly interplanetary communication because there was just a whole lot of interference. They couldn't understand where all the noise, there's just a bunch of noise in the universe. And they couldn't understand what it was. And eventually they came up with the idea that, and combined also with the idea that the universe is expanding, that the Big Bang, the creation of the universe from some sort of a singularity, would explain, first of all, the background noise, which would essentially be the echoes of the Big Bang. And second of all, the expanding universe, expanding in all directions, would appear to also lend credibility to that explanation. And they won the Nobel Prize for their scientific work in that, not the cosmology, but the sort of the nitty-gritty scientific stuff. And so this, unfortunately, blew Bertrand Russell out of the water. The poor man now could say the universe was a brute fact, because now we have a mechanism. It's called the Big Bang that explains, more or less, at least how the physical universe came to be. And that was what the question was. How did the physical universe come to be? And so sometimes science can help clarify that kind of a thing. So whether or not there is a brute fact or not, I'm going to leave open as an open question. I'll let you all think it through. I have posted a little metaphysics room there. How about if I just move metaphysics over here and give it a board of its own? You can start doing it. Turn my back and people walk out the door. Story of my life. Finish writing, I'll turn around and go not a seat filled, right? I don't know. What is that like? So it'll be here. well, let's talk more about it. Let's get real. Already mentioned, maybe all reality is physical. Is there a name for that? Yeah, it's called materialism. And there are a lot of materialists. Now, I'm talking about materialism in the sense of being addicted to possessions and money and status and stuff like that. Materialism, philosophically speaking, in most cases, just means that all reality is physical. And it's a pretty easy sell. A lot of people are materialists who, particularly if you happen not to be religious, you can accept materialism pretty well, particularly if you want to say that all the non-physical things that we experience can all be traced back to our brains and neurons firing and certain sequences and stuff like that. So to be a materialist is not that difficult if you don't have any desire to think about an afterlife and such things as that. So materialism is there as a possibility. Are there other possibilities? Sure. There's something called idealism. Idealism is a sort of a negation of materialism. Idealism is a view, and this is not the common view of idealism, it's the philosophical meaning of idealism. Idealism is the view that only the non-physical is real. There is no physical reality. So here we have sort of two bookends here. Only the physical is real, only the non-physical is real. And you can probably guess that idealism is a tough sell. Because you might say the immediacy of our physical experience and even our embodied sense of ourselves as embodied beings seems to make it very, very much of an implausible point of view. Yet there have been idealists in the history of philosophy, several prominent ones. George Berkeley, Bishop Berkeley, as he was called, is an Anglican bishop from Ireland died in the early 18th century. He was a person who he was a good philosopher as well as being an Anglican bishop, and his view was that all of reality is only two things: minds and ideas. That's it. There is nothing physical. What seems to be physical, the only thing that we have that we can say is true about the universe is that there are minds and there are ideas. And being that he was religious, that God is the biggest mind, not biggest in the sense of any physical description, because there is no physical world. But his was a mind that saw all, and we are nothing more than ideas in the mind of God. However, because we are made in God's image, we also have the capability of having ideas just like God does. So I have ideas of you. I don't. These are images here of you. You don't exist as physical entities. You just happen to be images that are in my mind, because I'm capable of gathering in and formulating ideas, but God is the big mind, and we're just his ideas, and he's had some good ideas and bad ideas. So let's sort of go beyond that, at least to show that idealism has at least had a few adherents to it. But as I said, it's a tough sell. Since we're going to talk about Descartes, Descartes was neither. He was not a materialist, and he was not an idealist. So what do? Well, for most of us, I would guess, we probably think there's a little bit true in each of those. Not true in the sense of any exclusiveness, but certainly it's hard to deny physical reality. But it's hard not to say there's something separate from physical reality, the mind, the soul, maybe God, if you wish to believe in that. And so the answer for Descartes, and for most everybody else, is called dualism. That reality is really has two things, some physical and some non-physical. And the vast majority of both philosophers and ordinary folk tend to be pretty much dualist today. I mean, dualism is sort of the easiest thing to sell because, again, intuitively it takes care of mental stuff and takes care of physical stuff. We seem to have a common and almost incessant experience of each, and they both seem to have a part in our life. And they do seem to be somewhat different kinds of phenomena. So he was a dualist. However, this is just to scratch the surface. We're going to sort of dig down and pull that scab off, watch it bleed a little bit. Because there's some other kinds of grabbing us. Use a different metaphor.
Pray for some platelets.
Hmm?
Pray for some platelets.
Pray for some platelets, yes, especially with those new ceramic knives I have, I need more than that. So, let's think about what kinds of dualism there might be. The way I'm sort of going to work it out for you, this is, I don't know if done in any other booking quite the way I'm doing, I'm just doing it because I think this is a good way to do it. We're going to call it connected and unconnected. Let's think of connected dualism first. What does that mean? First, what it means is that we experience and we can understand that there's a connection between our physical and our non-physical selves. Now we're talking about not just the nature of reality, let's say in the universe, but the way we're going to be thinking of it from now on, the way Descartes was thinking about it, is our own personal universe, ourselves. That Descartes believed that though dualism was the way the world can best be described, that only humans had both elements within them. The rest of the world is all physical. God is all non-physical, and we're this combination of the two. And so his view was that this is something we experience and we alone. So we're talking now about, let's say, the human experience, the human self, the dualistic self of both a physical and a non-physical self. And let's look at connected dualism first. Connected dualism says that we have just incessant experience of these two worlds within us being connected to one another in the following way. Say, for instance, you are sick. You're physically ill. You have the flu, you have a bug, a virus, whatever it could be. It's traceable back to something physical. Well, what happens to your mind? What happens to your spirit? What happens to your, if you had any optimism to begin with, where the hell did it go? All those different kinds of things. We can experience probably every flu season or whatever it is that we tend to get sick. This direct connection between something physical happens to us and we start to, our spirit droops, our energy gets low, not just energy in a physical sense, but our will, our willingness to be able to really try to bounce back and soldier on regardless, seems to take a hit. And so we often have this experience of something physical happens, and then it has an effect upon our non-physical selves, our mind, our soul, our spirit, whatever you want to call it. So that's the kind of thing we can see probably happens fairly often. So to be a connected dualist, to say, well, it's naturally, it's to be expected. There is communication or something, commerce between these two elements of the self. And we can see it going the other way. It's not just a one-way street where the physical affects the mental. Think of what free will is. Free will can be easily described as your mental intention being formed, non-physically, mentally, and then directing the physical body to do something. And you can't say that you have free will if you can't actually act upon whatever it is that your mind tells you to do. And so free will is the sense, I think I put a free will video up now. I don't think I did. That's okay. I put enough up already. The videos are up now. There's 6 of them, but one of them is only 3 minutes long. Actually, I think it's less than 3 minutes. So enjoy the videos. That's what's called Descartes in 3 minutes or something like that. So for anybody who wants, well, anyway, watch them all. I particularly watch one called Secrets of the Mind. Watch it more than once. I'll talk about that later when we talk about something that comes up. So here we have connected dualism, but it's not just the body affecting the mind. Free will is essentially the mind affecting the body, the connection between our intention to do something and then when and if we actually follow through physically doing it. We can experience that connection between having a mental state and then it resulting directly in a physical action that follows and in some sense mimics it. So the idea of connected dualism is pretty easy to sell. I mean, that's not at all hard to sell. And it's very plausible. So if you're going to be a dualist, it probably makes sense to be a connected dualist, not connected in a mafia sense. He's connected, you better leave him alone. That's why I carry my umbrella with the prison system logo on it. It gives me a lot of street cred. So we move on, though. But within connected dualism, is there even more that we can say? Of course, I'm a philosopher, I can always say more, and subdivide things down into the smallest insignificant distinctions. This happens to be a significant distinction. If, for instance, we are composed of both physical and non-physical as our reality, and let's say they are connected, is one more powerful than the other? Is one more important than the other? Does one dominate the other? Yes.
I would say that one goes first before the other. Like, I will think about lifting my hand, I have to think about it before I actually did it.
So for you, the non-physical would be dominant over or more important than the physical.
It just comes first.
Yeah, and I'm not, it's not a trick question. You know, that's one option. In fact, let's call it the mind superior option, as opposed to mother superior option. Mind superior. And you have good company in the world. Plato was a mind superior. Give him as an example. What we have to call him now, a mind superior connected dualist, okay? Probably poor Plato never heard himself described that way, but that's what he's going to be. And Plato did believe that there were two essences to the human, but that the body and the physical world was just such a worthless, crude replica of reality. The true reality, he didn't deny there was a physical reality, he just thought it was bogus. And the true reality is mental, pure thought. That's where all the great concepts come from, etc. So, there you have mind superior connected dualism. So maybe you all are Platonic in that section. Maybe you're mind superior connected dualist, where you say, I can experience this connection between the two, but I think my mind is more important than my body in my own life. You know, it seems to rule the roost. And Plato said it has to rule. That the rational part of you, the rational part of the three-part soul, as he called it, has to rule the other parts, which are much more fixated on physical needs and physical drives and things like that. So, Plato, mind superior, connected dualist, good company, as I said. Is there a body superior, connected dualist, or something like that? I think there is. First of all, what would it take to say, or what would be the vision of what human life is like if the body is superior, the mind is subservient, shall we say, or inferior to the body. The body runs everything, and the mind is sort of just along for the ride. That actually is a point of view. I'm going to put it up here, because it's getting down here.
Kind of like we're all biological incentives, and the mind, or what we experience as consciousness, is simply clicks and whistles to entertain it.
Yeah. It's called, actually, there's a theory. I like the theory a whole lot. Not because I believe the theory. I like it because it's a big word. Really big word. I like to put big words on it. So instead of giving you a person, I'm going to give you a big word. It's called epiphenomenalism. I think it's the biggest word you're going to learn this semester in philosophy. Epiphenomenalism is the name for body superior connected dualism. And what Jack was saying is sort of the way it's often explained. It's often explained as in a railroad metaphor. And the railroad metaphor is that the mind, the non-physical part of us, is like the whistle on the locomotive. And the body is the locomotive. The locomotive does all the heavy lifting. I mean, the body does all the work. But you hear the whistle, first of all. The whistle calls attention to itself. But it doesn't do any real anything. It's there. Consciousness is there. Consciousness, we can't deny that we're conscious. It's something that's sort of either an annoyment or for the body, or another way often has been described as the mind is something that the brain, through evolution, was able to generate as a way of sort of preserving us, taking the brain's running the show. That's the whole point. The brain runs our whole lives. But what we need as we became more and more sophisticated is something to occupy us, to sort of keep us from meddling with the brain. The brain really wants to protect itself. So it, little by little, creates this thing called consciousness, which suddenly gives us something to do. We look at, there's this little theater in our mind called life, or school, or social, or something, and we all get sort of excited about, ooh, this, and so we forget that, the brain is just sort of making all our decisions for us, doing everything, and the things that we think of, the brain really thought of about 6 seconds ago, and just formulated it for us, and it then puts it in our consciousness, and then we think, whoa, I just had a brainstorm, I just thought of a great idea. You didn't think of it, imbecile. Your brain thought of it and is feeding it to you, and you are like a parrot. You were like a puppet being played by your brain. So that's what I'm sort of giving, sort of an over-the-top version of epiphenomenalism, but it is the view that the mind and all the non-physical stuff that we are is just window dressing. Really, all the heavy lifting gets done by the brain. The brain's a physical organ, and the physical body with the brain and everything else is everything. But we have sort of grown up with this belief that that we're really hot stuff because we're conscious, and we think consciousness rules the roost. I think consciousness is sort of the last thing on a chain of cause that starts deep with brain states and eventually comes out as us thinking we're controlling the show, when it's really the brain giving us this little idea to make us think that. So that's a rather dreary thought. So which of these do you think Descartes is? Well, you don't have to think, I'll tell you, and then you'll see how it develops. Well, you know what?
Mine's superior.
Huh?
Mine's superior.
No. Descartes is, well, let's ask another question. After you get all this stuff going, how would an unconnected dualist ever answer this? Particularly the idea that, I've had this experience. I had the experience that, my mind is affected when I'm physically ill. I can control my body through free will, etc. It seems like the unconnected dualist has really nothing to answer these kinds of seemingly plausible, intuitively plausible claims. Well, the unconnected dualist would say two things. One thing it would say is that, first of all, you only have your own consciousness to go on. And so to say that this is the state of human consciousness, having just only observed your own consciousness, is really sort of going a little out on a logical limb. So that would be the sort of the idea that you haven't had a whole lot of experience except with your own consciousness. And that's really not enough to base an entire theory of let's say human reality upon. So Descartes is an unconnected dualist, and his view is that, well, the other thing that an unconnected dualist would say, and this is exactly what Descartes has to say, is that unless you can show in some sort of an objective way the connection between these two, we have these sort of, again, these intuitions that these things are connected to one another. But unless you can show the mechanism, give me the explanation, sort of going back down to epistemology, show me the type of knowledge that this causes that is. Causal knowledge should be pretty easy. What one thing causes another. Well, tell me how your mind state causes you to act, the free will thing. Or tell me how this physical malady you have causes you to be depressed or unhappy. Show me the mechanism that does that. And Descartes says, you can't find it. It's not there. And in the absence of being able to say, there's a mechanism, you have to say there's no mechanism. You can't say, well, I think so, I hope so. No, we're here looking for what can we know. And Descartes says, you can't know that. And his view is even stricter than that. In meditation too, he'll talk about, he won't call it substance, but he'll talk about the concept of substance. His view is that physical substance, matter and energy, is that kind of stuff, is just made up of different stuff than mental substance. Mental substance, whatever ideas and minds and thoughts and dreams, whatever they're made up of different stuff than matter, energy, and all the stuff that the physical world is made of. And so his view is, first of all, these are two different universes. They happen to coexist in us, but they're two different universes made up of two different kinds of things. So it's not unlikely that they don't have any way of communicating. We think they do. We have this hunch they do. We believe intuitively that they do. He says, show me the mechanism, and I'll take you seriously. In the absence of doing that, you're going to have to become an unconnected dualism like him, he says. He is an unconnected mind superior to us. So you are half right, Melanie. He is mind superior, but he was an unconnected dualist. So why is he being such a pain in the butt? Well, there's another little bonus that comes along with being an unconnected mind superior dualist. And it is something that for him was crucially important. Descartes straddles two worlds in the history of philosophy, like many philosophers did, who were counted in many other regions and many other areas. He was a devout Christian, and he was a blazingly good scientist. And he tried to find ways to not have them fight with each other, his faith and his scientific commitment. And one thing he was looking for metaphysically was some way to explain how life after death was possible. And his conclusion is only unconnected mind superior dualism can offer, let's say, a platform from which you can explain how life after death is possible. He said, understand what death and life are. Death, of course, is the cessation of whatever existence it happens to be. And we know sort of in the physical world that death of the body is sort of the way things sort of happen. But what we also, he says, have to recognize that is if these two are connected, as connected dualism claims, then there's no way to guarantee that the death of the body will not affect the soul. Now we're talking about the soul as a part of the non-physical self. That there's no way to guarantee that the death of the body will not affect, either by killing the soul or by deteriorating the soul. Because we already have said these two are connected, you can't then suddenly sever the connection. And so his view is, once you go on to the connected side, you can never guarantee life after death. Not guarantee it, but you can never make the claim that's necessary to start the process of arguing that life after death is possible. You're stymied from the very beginning. The unconnected dualism, the great thing for him is that the body inevitably dies. But if the body is unconnected to the soul, spirit, whatever you call it, then there is nothing logically or any other way that connects the two. And so, if the soul is alive and well and doing fine, then it can continue to live after your physical death. And it is only through unconnected dualism that that can happen. Well, okay, idealism lets it happen because there is no death of the body. The death of the body is an illusion because there is no body. You may think you're dying, just God sort of decided this is your time. As an idea, you're sort of going to be forgotten, shall we say, or something of that sort. So, other than that, it's difficult to understand or be able to explain in some sort of a reasonable, rational way how life after death is possible. For him, it was very important that life after death be possible. And mind superior means not just mind, but soul, all the non-physical self. Mind superior, unconnected, so the body dies, that's okay with me, dualism. So he's got that little scheme going. And I think that's sort of where we'll close it up tonight. I haven't quite finished it. We will probably start meditation one next time, but I got a few more things to put on the board, and we'll start here with, you might say,